Yeah, we were Book 1, Canto 5. By my edition, it is page 93. Essentially, the description that is given here, a pretty long one, I must say, is one that describes Ashrapati's breaking away from the molds of sense, from the limits of the mind, and all those limitations, boundaries that are around the human being and human nature. So we see here not a linear, continuous movement of any one aspect of the being, but we get here flashes of different experiences. Almost every sentence has a different direction of experience. So that is why it's a bit difficult to understand these lines, because we do not find any continuity of one single experience. So at times it is pretty difficult to get the image, but essentially let's keep in mind that it is the breaking of the bonds of the human nature. So here we are, we will take up from the line where we left last time. Increased and heightened were the instruments. Illusion lost her aggrandizing lens, as from her failing hand the measures fell. Atomic looked the things that loom so large. I think we did this line last time. You see, one of the important experiences is the loss of illusion. Loss in the sense when ignorance and illusion are removed from our eyes, then we see the things as they really are. Otherwise, illusion normally distorts our experience. It, as Sriaurobindo writes here, it is an aggrandizing lens. This is a beautiful expression to tell us how illusion, ignorance, non-understanding, misunderstanding, they enlarge the problem, they aggrandize. So because we lack the direct experience or the way to go to the real experience, so our mental fears, our assumptions, our vital fears, the moment they come in, these are the lens of illusion, they enlarge the problem. So that is what we are saying, that if all these things were not there, the fear, the presumptions, the doubts, then the problem and the issue itself would be pretty close, pretty small. But it is these things that really enlarge the problem. And luckily for Ashrapati, this lens of aggrandizing lens of illusion was withdrawn, and atomic looked the things that loom so large. So up until now, all those problems which were insurmountable, very big, very large, suddenly they get the right proportion. So when you see, I was explaining to you last time how when we see the earth vis-a-vis the atom, it looks so large. But then if you compare the earth as a planet with the other planets and then we keep on extending, then ultimately we see that earth is only a spot. So what we want to say is the right perspective is important. Otherwise, unnecessarily, we enlarge the problem and it becomes insurmountable. And then the little ego's ring could join no more. In the enormous spaces of the self, the body now seemed only a wandering shell. His mind the many-frescoed outer coat of an imperishable inhabitant. His spirit breathed a superhuman air. This is an interesting expression here again. The little ego's ring could join no more. You see, normally is the ego which really holds our body and our mind and all that. But here, that ego had vanished or vanishing, is no more binding upon Ashwapati. It's not that it is encircling Ashwapati and imprisoning him. Because as we said, he is losing ego too. And in the enormous spaces of the self, the body now seemed only a wandering shell. Now, the emphasis is on now. Now in the sense that in this new experience, when the illusion is lost, now he is getting the right understanding, the right perspective, that the body is only an imperishable, is only a wandering shell of the imperishable inhabitant. The one, the soul, the psychic being that is within, that is the real inhabitant. And the body is only a shell around it. The body does not have the essential truth. So it's only a shell and a mind also with many frescoed outer coat. That's again a beautiful thing. Many frescoed, as you must be understanding the word frescoes. You have, you say, Ajanta Ellora frescoes. So they're like we see this exhibition here, each panel is a fresco. That means the mind has so many sides, so many aspects. So even all these frescoes were only an outer coat. That means they are only an outside ring which is not important. So what we get to know is the inhabitant, the imperishable inhabitant is the soul. The body and the mind are only the outer rings with not much of importance. The imprisoned deity rent its magic fence as with a sound of thunder and of seas. Vast barriers crashed around the huge escape. You see, that's what I was telling you in the introduction. Now the previous line was the experience when the illusion is lost. And suddenly we go to the next line where it says, the imprisoned deity rent its magic fence. So this magic fence of the body and of the mind, now the soul within is bursting out, coming forth, and it's renting. You can see rending it out, breaking it out. And when it is rending it with a huge escape, what is happening? There's a sound of thunder and of seas. So imagine the impact. I mean, when the soul is not the escape of the soul at the time of death. Does not take it to be that. It's a soul now in Ashwapati's body, which is not escaping in the wrong sense, but is coming forth. Before it was imprisoned, but now it's breaking the barriers. And with that breaking, there's a sound of thunder and of seas. You see, you may think, how can there be such a big sound? The sound of thunder and of seas. But as I was reading somebody, that critic explains that in our Indian yoga itself, when it comes to spiritual experience, they describe about 8 to 10 sounds which are pretty normal in a spiritual experience, it seems. And some of them are the tinkle of bells. This is again all symbolic. I think we have come across in Sri Aurobindo also, the tinkle of bells, crooning of bees, passing of a caravan, sound of thunder, roar of sea, chirping of crickets, booming of drums. These are not just the sound, this is not the question of sound effect, but these seem to be symbolic of some spiritual experience. When the poet would say, there's a booming of a drum, so it must be something connected with the vital or something. So the critic is saying that the Sri Aurobindo, what he uses here, sound of thunder and of seas, is not a description of the escape of the soul. It's more a symbolic thing that with this hugeness, with this massive escape, he calls it later, vast barriers crashed around a huge escape. When there's such a massive escape that's taking place, there's a sound effect that is there in the spiritual experience. Immutably coeval with the world, circle and end of every hope and toil, inexorably drawn round thought and act, the fixed immovable peripheries efface themselves beneath the incarnate's tread. You see, this is of course a little easier to understand. Immutably coeval with the world. Now what is that coeval with the world? Circle and end of every hope and toil, inexorably drawn round thought and act. You see, there is, again coming to the new image, that all our life, our thought, our act, our feelings, they are encircled by limitations. And these limitations are coeval, as he puts it here, coeval with the world. That means since the time the creation itself was made, that these limits and limitations were part of the creation. And of course, we have known by now that the limit and the limitations is not something negative. It is something fundamental to form. You see, the very fact that the divine took on a form in this manifestation, or the usual word we call the creation, was to delimit himself. So this delimiting is another word for creation. So that's why we do not call it a negative thing, but it is the very foundation, fundamental thing about creation itself, is the delimiting and taking upon oneself the form. So when we say God created this world, what does it mean? That means the divine put upon himself certain limits and limitations. That was his choice. He wanted to delimit himself. So here we see the word coeval is that. Immutably coeval, what is that? Circle and end of every hope and toil is inexorably drawn round thought and act. The fixed immovable peripheries, you see he uses the word peripheries, all drawn, the limits. All these things, one go he says, efface themselves beneath the incarnate's tread. You see, when this incarnate, that is Ashwapati, he is moving forward. He wants to break himself free. So all these limits and limitations, these fences, everything is breaking down. So in one brief sentence we can say, Ashwapati is liberating himself from the lower nature. So this is all a description of the self-liberation from the lower nature, what Sri Aurobindo would call as the real freedom, the real salvation, the real liberation. This is the real liberation that is taking place. The dire velamen and the bottomless crypt, between which life and thought forever move, forbidden still to cross the dim dread bounds, the guardian darkness, mute and formidable, empowered to circumscribe the wingless spirit, in the boundaries of mind and ignorance, protecting no more a dual eternity, vanished, rescinding their enormous role. Once figure of creation's vain ellipse, the expanding zero lost its giant curve. So now we see the next experience. Now the dire velamen. Velamen, is this, as we see in the dictionary, it is a spongy sheath of an aerial root. That is, when there is a root we see in the aerial roots, there is a little softness on top. That's called the velamen. It's not a skin, a little soft, spongy skin. But here, it means the dire velamen and the bottomless crypt. Here, when we see later, it comes to the upper limit of the superconscient and the bottomless crypt of the inconscient. So now Sri Aurobindo is actually referring to the superconscient and the inconscient. And what is there? In that, between which life and thought forever move. So between this upper and the lower limit, all our life and creation, they are moving, they are evolving. Forbidden still to cross the dim, dread bounds. You see, we are not allowed, and since we are not capable of going beyond the superconscient or going beyond into the inconscient. We are not capable of common human beings. The guardian darknesses, mute and formidable. This is something very interesting. He calls them the darknesses, mute and formidable. Which are the darknesses? Both the superconscient and the inconscient are darkness. How come? You see, we can understand the inconscient being a darkness. But how is it possible that the superconscient is the darkness? When I was reading that, I remembered long back what we read in the Life Divine. Somewhere in the chapters on rebirth, I think, if I'm not too wrong. It says this: when we look at the superconscient, it's so far, so high, so beyond our reach, that it seems to be something of an unknowable, that's the word. It is something unknowable. So this sense of the unknowable makes the whole thing hazy, when you look at the clouds, there's a sense of the darkness, there's a sense of the impenetrability of light. Although it is superconscious, because of the distance from our consciousness, it appears to be dark. Dark not against light, but dark in the sense of unknowable. So the superconscient is unknowable and the inconscient is unknowable. Both levels they are unknowable. So he says, the guardian darknesses, mute and formidable. These are the darknesses up and down, empowered to circumscribe the wingless spirit in the boundaries of mind and ignorance. So these that are really limiting our spirit, the spirit in mind and putting us forever in ignorance, protecting no more a dual eternity, vanished, rescinding their enormous role. These two limits vanished, rescinding, withdrawing their enormous role. Once figure of creation's vain ellipse, the expanding zero lost its giant curve. You see, this is more a scientific thing. I would not be able to imagine this. I'm not able to get this. See, he says here, vain ellipse. Ellipse is this oval shape. The planet moves around the sun in an elliptical manner. So he's telling us, once figure of creation's vain ellipse, the expanding zero lost its giant curve. Now, how come there is this zero? From where does this zero of this expanding? You see, I'm trying to get the image there, that if this human spirit is going around in this oval spirit, how is it that there is the sense of the expanding zero? From where does the zero come in? I was not able to, match the things here. The old adamantine veto stood no more. That's of course we can understand. Once Ashwapati is liberated from all this lower nature, the adamantine vetoes, the adamantine, you can imagine something impregnable, something impenetrable. Now all that vetoed, look at the word vetoed, vetoes, that's the vetoes. You see all the limitations, circumstances, peripheries, boundaries, all that are really kept us very closed in a narrow way. Now they could not say anything because Ashwapati's soul had liberated itself. Overpowered were earth and nature's obsolete rule. So now Ashwapati is no more constricted by earth and its rule. He has overpowered nature and earth and their obsolete rule. The python coils of the restricting law could not restrain the swift arisen God. Abolished were the scripts of destiny. This is a beautiful, very, very powerful word here. Abolished were the scripts of destiny. You see, now let me take up the line from before. The python coils of the restricting law, L capital. The python coils of the restricting law could not restrain the swift arisen God in Ashwapati. Not the God himself, but the God in Ashwapati could not be restricted by this law. And what happened? Abolished were the scripts of destiny. You see, this is something that refers to actually here there is a passage here. Yeah. I don't know if you have the book, you can turn to Book 1, Canto 2. Where I'll just read out, you don't have to turn back. Now, there is a beautiful passage here which says, "For this she had accepted mortal breath," she is of course Savitri, "to wrestle with the shadow she had come, and must confront the riddle of man's birth, and life's brief struggle in dumb matter's night, whether to bear with ignorance and death, or hew the ways of immortality, to win or lose the godlike game for man, was her soul's issue thrown with destiny's dice." This is the destiny I am referring to. So Sri Aurobindo already speaks of Savitri, that she had come here to win or lose the godlike game for man, that is, to bear with ignorance or hew the ways of immortality. So what was the role, what was the function, what was the mission of Savitri? Either to give in to ignorance and death, or to start new channels, as he puts here, hew the ways of immortality. You see, the word hew is very, very beautifully given here. You see, hew is to dig a path, dig a channel, dig a line. And so, Sri Aurobindo does not use the word or make the ways of immortality or dig the ways of immortality. The word would be too harsh. But when he's saying the hew is a very soft, very, very delicate, very invisible way of making a new path. Now what does that lead to? It implies that this ignorance and death are also the, tracks that have been hewn upon the earth's consciousness. Now let me put it this way, because I'm trying to analyze this or understand this from a single word of the mother, where she says death is a habit. So if death and ignorance and mortality are habits in the earth's consciousness, then what Savitri is doing is to open a new channel of immortality. That's why she is hewing a path, which is an added thing. Up until now, it was not there in the earth's consciousness. What? Immortality was not part of earth's consciousness. So Savitri's work was a soul's issue thrown with destiny's dice. What was it? To hew the ways of immortality. So Savitri's single mission was this. You can remember only one sentence: hew the ways of immortality. Rest of the thing about Satyavan's death and conversation with death, they're all explanation of this single line. So Savitri's mission is this, and that is why Shwam's writing was her soul's issue thrown with destiny's dice. And here we have a similar word we see. Abolished were the scripts of destiny. What are the scripts of destiny? That ignorance and death. Those are the old scripts. And now Ashwapati is abolishing all those scripts, because Ashwapati, like Savitri, is also trying to get into this new path of immortality. So that is the abolition. So it is mother's work, Ashwapati's work, Savitri's work, Shwam's work, you can call it anything. So this is of course with Ashwapati we see, I think I should correct myself a little bit. This abolition of the scripts of destiny is not on the same level as that of Savitri. Savitri came with that fundamental issue. But Ashwapati, what's happening? He had abolished the scripts of destiny. How could he do that? By rising to a higher level of consciousness. Mother does explain somewhere, I do not remember the exact conversation. She says there are levels and levels of destiny. When she talks about freedom and destiny and determination and destiny, she says there is no one determination or one destiny. There are different levels: the physical, the vital, the mental, the spiritual. And depending on the level of your consciousness, you will fall in line with that destiny. Understand this? So if you are on the physical level, you are bound to go towards a destiny that's been given in your life. But if you want to erase the destiny of the lower consciousness or the physical consciousness, you have to get into the higher level of consciousness. So when we say about karma, yes, karma can be abolished. The lower karma can be abolished by rising into the higher consciousness. So what is going to happen on the physical will happen if you live only on the physical level. That is why I think when she says, when you turn to spirituality, your karma can be erased. Your karma on the physical mental level can be erased by rising to the spiritual level. Otherwise you cannot erase your karma. You will be facing the consequences of your actions and all that. But it's only when you come to the higher level, then the lower is erased and is abolished. So that is what is happening actually with Ashwapati. Because it's going to the higher levels of consciousness, the lower destiny is all abolished. There was no small death-hunted creature more, no fragile form of being to preserve from all-swallowing immensity. Because now the littleness, the little human being, the little powerless human being. He's not there in Ashwapati because he has been taken up by that all-swallowing immensity, and he calls the human being death-hunted creature. You see, this mortal being is a death-hunted creature, but Ashwapati is not that anymore. He has gone beyond into the higher levels. The great hammer beats of a pent-up world heart burst open the narrow dams that keep us safe against the forces of the universe. This is a beautiful description. The great hammer beats of a pent-up world heart burst open the narrow dams that keep us safe against the forces of the universe. You see, why is it that our consciousness is so small? Why does it get constricted? Why do we want limits or self-limitations? The thing is, we feel safe in our smallness. We feel secure in our limits. The moment, I think there was an incident where the mother, when she met with somebody and then she was talking about contact with God, a psychic being, when you'll have, then you'll be free and all that, free from the limitations. Then the man came back to the mother and said, but if I don't have these limitations, what will I do? How will I be secure? I don't want to lose my food and my this and my that. So these circles that we put around ourselves somewhere give us the sense of security. So for the human being, to be small is to be secure. The moment he widens himself, his contacts, his consciousness, he's kind of exposed to, if we can use the word. You see, we want to become narrow so that, like the ostrich, we don't want to see the world. So that is what he's saying, that these narrow dams that keep us safe, give us a sense of safety, not keep us safe. But we feel, well, like we say, well, I don't want to go out of my family, my kids and my husband and my wife. We're a small unit family, we're safe and secure. But if you want to enlarge yourself, call others, meet others, then you feel that you're going beyond your boundaries. That you feel the sense of losing some of your impact. So here was it with Ashwapati. That sense of the narrowness, narrow dams is burst because of this world heart by the universal force and consciousness. The soul and cosmos faced as equal powers, a boundless being in a measureless time. Invaded nature with the infinite. He saw unpathed, unwalled his titan scope. See, the soul and cosmos faced as equal powers. Now, who is the soul and the cosmos? The soul is Ashwapati. Now he has come into the universal level. So we see the whole process that we have been given here is that of the individual turning universal. So Ashwapati is no more the small being. He has now become a universal consciousness. Now, what do we understand by the universal consciousness? It's a beautiful definition. A boundless being in a measureless time. The word that is there for boundlessness is the infinite space, and measureless time is eternity. So the universal is nothing but a combination of the infinite and the eternal. That beyond what we say, beyond time and space. So that is the consciousness. So here was a massive experience when Ashwapati is looking at or becoming the universal consciousness, and he has a sense of the infinite and the eternal. And so now, in that universal consciousness, he saw unpathed. There are no paths that have been taken before. So unpathed, unwalled, all that is new now. And remember, that was the case with the mother. She always talked about the virgin forest where you walk through to the new dimension. So here, Ashwapati is now ready to mount toward the transcendental. Maybe that's where you will see the vision of the Divine Mother. But now we are stopped at the universal level. All was uncovered in his sealless eye. A secret nature, stripped of her defense, once in a dreaded half-light formidable, overtaken in her mighty privacy, lay bare to the burning splendor of his will. Some of his phrases are extremely powerful, the burning splendor. Now what's happening? Now as he moves forward in the universal consciousness, everything of cosmos, all nature is kind of saying, lay bare, stripped of her defense, lay bare to the burning splendor. What is it? Her half-light formidable, her mighty privacy, all the secrets of the universal worlds. Because remember, universal is not a singular creation or world. There are multiple worlds in the universe. So all these worlds are now laying bare their secrecies to welcome Ashwapati. Come, this is my secret, this is my power, which you may use, which you may talk about when you go to the transcendent Divine Mother. You see, these are all revealing themselves so that Ashwapati becomes the messenger to the Divine Mother and talks about all these universal forces. So in shadowy chambers lit by a strange sun, and opening hardly to hid mystic keys, her perilous arcanes and hooded powers confessed the advent of a mastering mind and bore the compulsion of a time-born gaze. So all the chambers, in shadowy chambers lit by a strange sun and opening hardly, you see, all the worlds which till now were secrets, were mystic, were hardly did they open their powers, all of them now for the first time, they're opening themselves to the mystic gaze of Ashwapati. The time-born gaze is the time-born gaze of Ashwapati, because he is the one who has come from birth, from earth, so he is called the time-born gaze. Incalculable in their wizard modes, immediate and invincible in the act, her secret strengths native to greater worlds, lifted above our needy limited scope, the occult privilege of demigods, and the sure power pattern of her cryptic signs, her diagrams of geometric force, her potencies of marvel-fraught design, quoted employment by an earth-nursed might. A lovely phrase, quoted employment, look at the phrase. That means all these beautiful, all these worlds, what are they? What he calls here, incalculable in their wizard modes, immediate and invincible in the act, her secret strengths native to greater worlds, lifted above our needy limited scope. All these worlds that are there in the universal level, all of them, as we said before, are revealing themselves to this earth-nursed might. As I said before, time-born gaze, which represents Ashwapati, earth-nursed might again represents Ashwapati. So the same thought is continuing, that all these worlds with their marvel-fraught design, with their geometric force, with their cryptic signs, which all these worlds which are privileges of the demigods, everything is now revealing themselves, showing themselves, inviting Ashwapati, saying that come to our secrets, we open all the secrets, which was the privilege of the gods. But now all these worlds are saying, we will also show you. Although you are an earth-born person, we are not supposed to show ourselves to you. But now that you have come into this universal mode, universal zone, our secrets are open to you. A conscious, nature's quick machinery, armed with the latent splendor of miracle, the prophet passion of a seeing mind, and the lightning bareness of a free soul force. It's the same meaning. You say, armed with the latent splendor of miracle, the prophet passion of a seeing mind. You see, this is the seeing mind which we have said many a time. It is the Kavi, it is the seer, it is the Rishi. So now the description is that this Ashwapati, freed from the bondage of nature, has become a seer, a revealer. He is like a prophet. He is seeing everything in the universal. All are like an exhibition around him, inviting him for his sight. So, and the lightning bareness of a free soul force, all once impossible, deemed, could now become a natural limb of possibility, a new domain of normalcy supreme. So what was previously impossible has become now a normalcy supreme. An almighty occultist erects in space this seeming outward world which tricks the sense. He weaves his hidden threads of consciousness. He builds bodies for his shapeless energy. Out of the unformed and vacant vast, he has made his sorcery of solid images, his magic of formative number and design. The fixed irrational links none can annul, the crisscross tangle of invisible laws, his infallible rules, his covered processes achieve unerringly an inexplicable creation wherever error carves dead frames of knowledge for a living ignorance. Well, this is highly occult, as the word itself tells us. An almighty occult erects in space. Now this is a very tough imagery, because it's, as I said, it's so highly occult. We are not able to get a kind of an image or that really is putting together the whole idea. But still what we understand is an almighty occultist. Who is this occultist? Ashwapati. Erects in space this seeming outer world which tricks the sense. Now, what did we understand? Till now this universal worlds are opening themselves, revealing their secrets. And now this great occultist, this great prophet, this great seer called Ashwapati or Sri Aurobindo, now they are now, what is this? They are going into the world which tricks the sense. You see, not going into the world, he is going beyond this world which tricks the sense. That means all the outer world, outer seeing world, Ashwapati is going away from and going into the universal. And there he sees, he weaves his hidden threads of consciousness, he builds bodies for his shapeless energy. Now this is what I was telling you. It's pretty occult in the sense that with his energies, with his newfound energies on the universal level, is forming new forms, new bodies. And this crisscross tangle of invisible laws, his infallible rules, his covered processes, achieve unerringly an inexplicable creation wherever error carves dead frames of knowledge. Well, this is something I was confused a bit, because once he goes into those worlds, why is Sri Aurobindo referring to this, his magic of formative number and design, the fixed irrational links none can annul? I frankly could not get a clear image here, so I had to skip that line and I'm going to the next one. In her mysterious moods, divorced from the Maker's laws, She too, as sovereignly creates her field, her will shaping the undetermined vasts, making a finite of infinity. She too can make an order of her caprice, as if her rash superb wagered to outwie the veiled Creator's cosmic secrecies. The rapid footsteps of her fantasy, amid whose falls wonders like flowers rise, are surer than reason, defter than device, and swifter than imagination's wings. All she new fashions by the thought and word, compels all substance by her wand of mind. Mind is a mediator divinity. Now we are getting to the new line. But what is it here? In her mysteries moves, divorced from the Maker's laws. Divorce, of course, nature, divorced separated from the Maker's laws, makes she too as sovereignly creates her field. Now this is suppose if I can trace some idea. What we see here is a description of the world as created by nature, Prakriti. Now we were in this world of the universal, where Ashwapati is getting his experiences, where he is formulating different forms out of his own energies. But then we come to the image of the nature, Prakriti, where she is creating her field, her will shaping the undetermined vast, making a finite of infinity. Now what is the real function of Prakriti? What is the real role of nature? The real function is exactly the single line, making a finite of infinity. That means giving a limit, a form which has limits. That is the function of nature. Nature, in fact, in other passages, Sri Aurobindo describes how it attracts the Supreme into this form. And to attract the Supreme into this form, it makes these beautiful forms and attracts the Spirit. So her function is basically to make finite of infinity. She too can make an order of her caprice, of her imaginations. She too can make a beautiful order. As if her rash, superb wagered to outwie the veiled Creator's cosmic secrecies. Yeah, now you get the idea. Sri Aurobindo is taking us to this nature and telling us that even nature also has her beautiful forms. It is in competition with the forms that are there in the universal world. What Ashwapati is seeing are beautiful forms. Sri Aurobindo is telling us even nature has her own forms, which are in competition with those universal forms. So, the rapid footsteps of her fantasy, amid whose falls wonders like flowers rise, are surer than reason, defter than device, and swifter than imagination's wings. So one thing that is certain with nature is that sureness of matter, in the sense that in creation matter gives to the Supreme Creator that sureness, that definiteness, that there is something solid and concrete and eternal. Why am I saying this? If a thing is created out of air, or out of water, or out of fire, they are not as eternal as things made out of matter. That's why one of the functions of matter is to give an eternity to the Supreme Form. Neither water nor fire nor ether could give to the Spirit this assurance of the eternity of form. This assurance of the eternity of form is only matter that can give us. So that's what he's telling us here, that are surer than reason, depther than device, and swifter than imagination's what? Her rapid footsteps of her fantasy, all her forms. All she new fashions by the thought and word, compels all substance by her wand of mind. By her wand of mind. So this matter or this nature, not matter, this prakriti or this nature, new fashions by thought and word. Of course, she does in evolution use thought, use life to create greater forms and more beautiful and more fantastic forms. But basically, is matter that gives eternity, permanence to the form. Now, this is something new experience that is coming in. Mind is a mediator divinity. Its powers can undo all nature's work. Mind can suspend or change earth's concrete law. Now, this is something that we are realizing even at present, especially through psychology. It's true that nature has solid things, has beautiful forms, but mind, which is a mediator between matter and spirit, can undo all nature's work. That's what we see now, the effect of mind over matter, the effect of mind over the physical. Of course, in the mother we have seen all ailments and all diseases and all this are really, there is, because there is an imbalance between the mind and the physical and the vital. So if you want to cure yourself, we have to first of all attack ourselves on the mental level. Is what you would call as the auto-suggestion. A lot of medical doctors are also coming up with these auto-suggestions. But basically, the whole problem of our existence lies in our mind. How do we look at a thing? So it is that mental attitude which really reflects itself on the physical and the vital. So it's telling that mind is a mediator which can undo all nature's work. Mind can suspend or change earth's concrete law. You see, depending on how your mental attitude is there, you can change the same incident into something positive or something negative. But it all depends on the mental law. So it says, it can change or suspend concrete law. Affranchised from earth habit's drowsy seal, the leaden grip of matter it can break. Indifferent to the angry stare of death, it can immortalize a moment's work. A simple fiat of its thinking force, the casual pressure of its slight ascent, can liberate the energy dumb and pent within its chambers of mysterious trance. It makes the body sleep a puissant arm, holds still the breath, the beatings of the heart, while the unseen is found, the impossible done, communicates without means the unspoken thought. It moves events by its bare silent will, acts at a distance without hands or feet. But that's the power of the mind that we have been getting here. Now we have a few directions here. I'll just try to go through that. Now what is it that is power of the mind? It says, the leaden affranchised from earth habit's drowsy seal, the leaden grip of matter it can break. It is the same thing that we are saying, that the will of the mind, it can break the old law, it can change your life, it can change even matter, it says. It can leaden grip of matter also it can change by its own power and willpower. Indifferent to the angry stare of death, it can immortalize a moment's work. You see, death is there, of course, sweeping all our life. Every instant death is there. But then if a mind takes this attitude that I am not going to die, the mind means it is close to the psychic realization it has to, because mind by itself will not be able to take the decision unless it has some kind of a contact with the psychic being, where it can say, I'm not the person to die. It's the body which will die. So the moment you change your attitude saying, what does it matter if this body goes? I am immortal. So it's again and again is telling us about the mental attitude. So indifferent to the angry stare of death, it can immortalize a moment's work. A simple fiat of its thinking force, the casual pressure of its slight ascent, can liberate the energy dumb and pent within its chambers of mysterious trance. Again, it's the same thing idea we are saying. A simple fiat is an order. So if the mind can take a decision, if it can really bring out a willpower, what can it do? The casual pressure of its slight ascent can liberate the energy dumb and pent. So even a man who is really, I think he will tell us later, with his chambers of mysterious trance, you see a dull tamasic person, a sleeping dormant vital, or a mind which is dumb, all that can be transformed if we can take once for all a fantastic, what Sri Aurobindo calls here, a thinking force, a willpower. So what is it we are trying to understand here is, matter is permanent form, is true. But it is the mind which is more subtle, and thereby it is much more powerful. So understand this. Matter is solid and concrete, but it doesn't have the powers to change. But the subtler the force, the greater its power. And mind is more subtle than matter. So this subtler mind has a greater power over matter. So similarly, if you go beyond mind, there is something called the intuitive mind, the illumined mind, the over mind. So these, the higher the levels of the mind, they have greater power on its lower levels. So we see the need of the supermind, which is the highest power and has the greatest power of transformation of matter. So that's the logic, that the subtler the force, the greater its power. So it makes the body sleep a puissant arm, holds still the breath, the beatings of the heart, while the unseen is found, the impossible done, communicates without means the unspoken thought. You see, this is hold still the breath is your meditation, is your vipassanas, is all your techniques. So, mind holding itself breathless, quiet, thoughtless, it becomes a very powerful thing, and it can have, communicates without means the unspoken word, thought. It moves events by its bare silent will, acts at a distance without hands or feet. For this we understand that mind can act, it doesn't require feet, it doesn't require your hands, but it can project its force into some incident and act there. Of course, this projection is not only the thought wave. Well, a lot of times Mother also explains that through a thought wave you can influence a person. But for that you must yourself have a very solid, concentrated thought force. It's not that every thought you throw out has a power to effectuate. There must be a focus point. And then we see in Sri Aurobindo the next step, not only a mind thought force, but the spiritual mind also has its own thought force, which could really change the destiny of Germany, the Second World War and all that. So these are all called the projections. So that's what I'm trying to explain, where the mind can act without any of your hands or feet, but it can act at a distance and effectuate things. Well, we will take it all there. Yes, we are getting into the occult and all that, but slowly it will release and we'll come back to some spiritual experience which is more within our scope of understanding. Let's have concentration.